In verse 7, the angel asked John why was he marveling at the things he was saw or what he was seeing. And the angel tells him, says, I'm going to tell you what the mystery of the woman that you saw and the beast that carried her, which had 7 heads and 10 horns. Anytime, or most of the time, you see in Revelation, it mentions 10 horns. You're going to think of 10 powers. And that's still what you're looking at, is 10 powers. And if you're thinking of 10 powers, you're thinking of 10 kings, or you're thinking of 10 nations. So that makes that a little easier when you see that. It generally meant, because horn, what Psalm talks about, I'm going to grab a hold of the horn of the altar and hang on to it. Horn means power too. But 10 horns, that usually means 10 nations, 10 powers, and which is the case here as well. And we see that in verse 8, he says, the beast you saw is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. Regardless of what else that verse says, of what else that's in there that's confusing, this beast, which does not have to be an animal with eyes, and does not and the feet of a lion, it just uses the terminology beast. We know that this is a person or an entity, but because it says he's going to descend out of the bottomless pit, we know that's the son of perdition. We know that that's Satan. That's who we're talking about, the devil. And what he says he is not and shall ascend. That's because that we saw that he was had the appearance of being killed and come back to life. We know that he didn't come back to life because only Christ can give life. So again, he was just deceiving people, and we know that that's who is talking about here. And at the end of verse 8, it still talks about him, the beast that was and is not and yet is. There's a dual meaning in that verse. We know not only is it talking about the person, but we know it is also talking about who he represents. And who he represents is the political power of this day that we're in. And so the beast that was, well, in John's time and all throughout John's life, the power or the beast or the nation in power was Rome. Then Rome was defeated, so it was not, and is to come, or is going to, yet is talking about that yet in tribulation time, yet is again, is what it's saying. So Rome lived at this time during Paul's life. Rome was mostly destroyed. They lost their power. Somebody else took over. And yet is means yet now, yet during the tribulation period. So he's talking about Rome coming back in again. And so how do we know, or what are some of the reasons that we keep picking on Rome or saying that it is Rome? Well, verse 9 goes on to say the 7 heads that we saw in verse 7 are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. That's pretty clear. We read all throughout the Bible the 7 mountains of Rome or the 7 hills of Rome. So that gives us a real good indication that these heads are reference to the horns on which the woman sitteth. Who is the woman? The woman is the church of that day. We know that that's who it is. She is the church of that day. We call her the great whore because she's committed fornication with all the other religions that there is. And she derives her religion or her covenant from Babylon, from Nimrod, all the way up to now. That's this woman, the church, who is the false religion, the apostate church is who that is. And she's alive now and comes straight out of the pits of hell, according to verse 8. Satan is behind them. Satan is the one who was behind Nimrod in Babylon. And when God separated them, the languages, they went different places, but the religion, or the what they were taught, the pantheistic, evolutionary, humanistic religion, that was the same for everybody. And that's why in China, in Iran, all of the religions of the world have some commonality. And most of them, I guess there's some that don't, but most of them, the religions, have Jesus in them. Most of them have Abraham in them. Islam has them in them. Buddhism has it in them. The Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons have it in them. Jehovah's Witness has it in them. It's all an offshoot of the true gospel. And you can trace it all the way back to Babylon, those ideas. It is the false church that we're talking about. And after the rapture comes, they're going to be the only ones left. And so they are all going to form a one world religion under this beast. And I think it's going to be Romanism, Catholicism. And verse 9 gives me that indication. And verse 10 says there are 7 kings, and out of those 7, 5 have fallen, and one is, the other is not yet to come. We're talking about going to rise up again. And when he cometh, he may continue for a short space. Well, 7 kings. Well, we had Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persian, Rome, and all of those were part of the nations that we saw before. That we started out with the Medes and the Persians. We started out with Babylon, and then we had Greece, and then we had Assyria, and then we had Egypt. And John was told here that 5 were fallen. They fell by the wayside. They were defeated. Egypt was defeated. Assyria was defeated. Babylon was defeated. Persia was defeated. Rome was defeated. So those have all fallen. And so in Genesis and Exodus gives us the list of all of these that were there and have been defeated. And when we look at Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and the statue he had, the head was Babylon, the arms was the Medes and the Persians, and then we had Greece, which Alexander, remember he was the leopard, and he went all over the place fast, and he defeated the people. The feet was Rome, and so we had all of those nations throughout history, and they fell by the wayside. And so that's what verse 10 is talking about, that 5 of the kings had fallen. One is, John says, one is right now today, Rome, and the other is not yet the one, not yet come. He's talking about the revived Roman Empire. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. So he's going to have a short time. How much is his time? About 3.5 years. He's going to revive for the 7-year tribulation period. But during the last half of the tribulation period, he's going to be in great power. How do I know that? Verse 11, and the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th. So we see it talks a little bit about it in verse 7. In verse 8, it gives that same description, was, is not, and yet is. Verse 10, it's the same description, is to come, and when he cometh, he continues for a short space. So it's kind of like you're building up a crescendo and say, well, okay, you've given me that same description, 3, who is this guy? And so in verse 11, he tells John who it is. He's the one called the 8th. And he is going to be the revived Roman Empire. So how do I know what I have just surmised is true? Verse 12 says, the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. They're going to rule with the beast for a while. Verse 13 says, these all have one mind, and shall give their power and strength to the beast. They're all, the rapture is gone, has happened. And for 3.5 years, there's going to be freedom of religion. There's going to be, like we have now, of course, it's mostly going to be false religion. And there'll be peace with Israel. And with Iran and Iraq and all. So there's going to be peace. And then mid-tribulation, that when the Antichrist comes on the scene, he is already here. We see that the church is riding on his back. The church during the first 3.5 years is going to be the most powerful entity. The church is pretty strong now. If you had the money of what the Vatican had, it would surprise you more than many nations do. But when we see that the beast carried her, the beast is carrying the church for about 3.5 years. The church is strong. And the beast is supporting the church. But there's going to come a time, which we are getting into right now, that the Antichrist is going to say, hey, church, I no longer need you. Not only do I no longer need you, I want your money, and I want you to point people to worship me. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing that, but that's exactly what's going to happen. The final form of the world government, when the Antichrist says, I'm God, worship me, is symbolized by this 8th beast. The 8th beast is going to be the final form of the world government, and it's going to be the world empire during the tribulation. And we know that the revived Roman Empire is going to be in place right after the tribulation. We know that they receive power as kings, but as 1 hour power. They receive authority as kings 1 hour with the beast. So the president of Sweden, the president of Poland is still going to be president, but they are going to get their power from the beast. So maybe he's the head of the European Union, maybe it's something else, but that's where they're going to get their power. And they're going to have one mind, and they're going to give their power and strength to the beast. So they're going to support what I'm most confident is they're going to support Rome. Rome don't have an army. They will use everybody else's armies, but they will give their support to Rome or to the beast. And they will continue to do that for the 3.5 years. Mid-tribulation, the Antichrist takes that power. He is described in verse 11 as the 8th and is the world empire, which is going to be destroyed by Christ at the second coming. And verses 8 through 11 describe the final form of Gentile power that they have in alliance with apostate religion, and she's symbolized by the habit, or by the harlot. And so they all have one mind. They come together, and so what their goal is as they come together is they're going. It says not these do, but these shall make war with the Lamb, and so what is going on here is. The final stages of Revelation is that this world empire is going to be have all the power in the world. They have a nucleus of 10 kings, 10 presidents, 10 whatever they use, prime ministers, and they join in a confederacy represented by what we see right here, represented by 10 horns. And these kings, in contrast with the seven heads of the beast, are kings not who rule in succession, but they rule simultaneously during the end times, like I said, different countries, and they will form the revived Roman Empire throughout the tribulation period. That's what they'll do. And it says they're going to make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he's Lord of lords, King of kings, and they that are with him are called chosen and faithful. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore, the harlot, the apostate church, sitteth, are peoples and tongues, peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou saw upon the beast, and it gives you a description here, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. Now, you notice here that the 10 horns, the 10 kings, which rule simultaneously, the 10 kings that we know are 10 kings, because verse 12 tells me they are 10 kings, and they receive their power as kings 1 hour with the beast. Their power is short, and they get the power from the Antichrist. And the Antichrist, the revived Roman Empire, is going to be the 8th beast. Was, is not, and he is 8th. So that's the revived Roman Empire, consisting of the 10 nations which make up the empire. They have one mind, one strength. They go to make war with the Lamb, but it says that he's going to overcome them. And 15 says, these people which you saw, multitudes, nations, and tongues, where the whore sitteth. And then we see at 16, it kind of takes a change. 16 is thrown in there, and you say, well, what's going on with 16? And what's going on with 16 is the Mystery Babylon, the great whore, the ally of political Babylon here. She has incorporated, as we've seen up to now, she has incorporated all the anti-Christian or the pseudo-Christian religions under her control. Everybody's going to be together, but the true church, they're going to come under her control. And probably, and I think we can agree to it, probably the church, this church, is going to control the educational and the cultural and the sociological systems throughout the world as well. You look at where we are, you think, well, how's that going to be possible? Well, look where we're at today. Our Secretary of Education, and well, see, helping her is the Department of what's that called? False, not that new department they formed about the information that wasn't true disinformation. Yeah, we got a Department of Disinformation. So we see that, and we have critical race theory. We are teaching children, elementary schools. I don't know who come up with the, well, yeah, you know, a couple of years ago, I had no idea that we were teaching the garbage that we're teaching in school, and that now we're to the point to where everybody is a they, there's not a he or a she, and you get a government form now. I'm filling out paperwork for mom, and on the forms, it says, do you self-identify as, and then it gives you a box over here, check the following. Today, I'm more in touch with my feminine side. The estrogen is working on me, so I'll check it. Next week, if we're hiring, but we need people, someone of a different whatever, then I'll check that box. If now we have to have someone who is LGBT, we got to have well, that includes transgender, and down on the bottom of the list is going to be, where a Christian might fall in. But that is what we're doing today in our republic. When people are in control, and it's supposed to be us that chooses what the government does, and they're supposed to answer to us. Well, it's going to be easy to see how, when Christians are gone and there's very little pushback, how this anti-Christian pseudo-religious person is going to be the one to step on the scene and say, hey, we ought to control that, and trust us to educate your children how they need to be, and we'll handle your sociological problems. And I think we have the right answers, how we can all get along and nobody be offended and everybody be equal, and it'd be equity. We do equity, we pay reparations, and everybody just hold hands. See, just think what it's going to be like when the church is gone. Who's going to object to that? And the answer is nobody. Everybody's going to say, hey, that's a great idea. Let's do that. Let's give them the authority. We already have these branches in the government that are doing this, so they're in place now. Yeah, let them do it. So they're going to handle these systems throughout the whole world, and in with this, however it starts out, but the underlying condition of it all is going to be designed to promote the worship of the beast. And not too many years ago, if you would have told me the things that I'm telling you now, you'd have said, well, that's just can't happen. And I would have had to agree with you. But I think we can all see how easy it is to make that connection today. I was going to say make that leap, but boy, there's no leap to it. It's just to put two and two together, and it does still equal 4 to most of us. We can see that that's what's going to happen. And the beast is going to promote worship of the beast and Satan as the god of this world. And once that is accomplished, which it's going to be accomplished, and that's what the church's role is going to be. And so we see here early on in verse 7 that the beast is carrying the horde. The beast is supporting the church. Satan, or the Antichrist, is supporting the church. That's what that's mean. He's given power to the church. The church is going to do all these things, go together, everybody together. He's going to do that. The church is going to make everything work great. And then the church is going to start pushing the worship of the Antichrist, of Satan. And once this is accomplished, which it will be, then the political power, the beast with the political power, the chapter 18 Babylon, the beast with the political power is not going to have any further use for the church, is not going to have any further use for that religion, that dogma, because he's going to take all the power from the church, and he's going to appropriate all her vast holdings for himself, and he's going to destroy everything that he can't use. So that's what we're talking about in verse 16. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, the powers of that day, the 10 horns, the political powers, the revived Roman Empire, that were upon the beast, it says, these shall hate the whore. They're actually going to hate the church. Well, wait a minute. Over here in verses 7 and verses 9 and verses 10, we see where they were supporting the beast. And that is exactly correct. That's what happens. So we've moved 3.5 years down the road. Now we're mid-tribulation. And the Antichrist says, hey, worship me, I'm God. And he takes all the authority, all the power from the church or the whore, which is a beast. It said they're a beast. He takes all that from them and takes all of the church's holdings for himself, and he pushes the church aside, actually destroys the church. It says, these shall hate the whore. Not only shall they hate the whore, shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. They will destroy the church that is there. And the buildings won't be burnt down and things like that. It'll just be that the government now controls the church instead of the church controlling the government. The church is going through thinking, hey, man, we got this made, and we're moving on toward this, everything's going right. Well, sure you are. Who's leading the church? That's going to be the false prophet. He's one of the three of the unholy trinity, the false prophet. He's going to be leading the church. He knows what's going to happen, and he's just dragging everybody along with it. And then they're going to destroy the church, going to burn with fire. All the power that the church has now, the economical or the political government has charge of it. And it says they're going to make desolate, naked. They'll hate the whore. Who's the whore? Verse 7 tells us who the whore was. And we've been talking about the whore for a little bit. They're going to make her desolate. They're going to give all the power to the ruler of the revived Roman Empire. Why? Verse 17 says, for God hath put it in their hearts to fulfill his will and to agree and to give their kingdom to the beast. Whose kingdom? Well, is the 10 horns. The 10 horns, the 10 powers, the 10 governments that rule simultaneously are going to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And so it's going to be their idea, at least they think it is, that they do that. But they're going to give their power to him. So we see that earlier, in the first verses, the harlot is sitting upon the many waters. We see that the symbolic meaning of that was the people, the nations. And we see now that the situation has changed, that the political power of the world has taken everything from the beast, and they're no longer sharing rule with the woman, and they're taking all the power for themselves. The Antichrist is on the scene and says, worship me. And we see in verse 16 the downfall of the apostate church. The first half of tribulation, 3.5 years, 1,240 days. The apostate church is popular, it grows, it establishes itself as a power over the world. Then the beast takes that when he proclaims himself as dictator and as God, and demands that you worship him, demands that you take the mark of the beast. He destroys, for all intents and purposes, the church, and substitutes the ecclesiastical apostasy to the worship of himself. And I think 13:8 it says this, and here's the time for this. And all that dwell upon at this time, at what time? At the end of verse 16, what is written in 13:8 happens, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him whose names are not written in the Lamb's book of life, slain from the foundation of the world. Everybody will worship him who doesn't take the mark of the beast. They'll worship him, with the exception of just the true believers. And we know that there's a death warrant put out for the true believers. And why? Well, so that the words of God shall be fulfilled. And in 18, and the woman which thou sawest is that great city. So now we finally see, why didn't he just tell me that to start with? Well, the Bible says, here is wisdom. Blessed is he that readeth, he that heareth, because God wants you to read it and to search it out and to understand that for most of it, he gives you the answer. You just have to read a little bit, because here's the answer. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Oh, well, the woman that I saw, what woman? In verse 7, and the angel said to me, wherefore dost thou marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman. Well, we had a lot of time in between there, verses 8 through 17. But the angel says, I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carried her, and the 7 heads and 10 horns. Verse 18 says, the woman that you saw, in verse 7, is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Well, that makes sense. And verse 7 says, I will tell you the mystery of her, which had the 7 heads and 10 horns. 7 heads. Verse 9, 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. Who's the woman? Verse 18, the woman's the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Who's the 7 heads? That's the 7 mountains. Well, what's the 10 horns? The 10 horns, verse 12, the 10 horns which I saw are 10 kings, 10 rulers, 10 presidents, 10 prime ministers, which have no kingdom as yet, but will receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast, a short time. So, as complex as that was, we can look now at 7 and 8, and we can jump over at 18, verses 18, verse 12, and verse 9, and get the answer to the questions that were there. Why did the Lord put them more like that? Well, so the world can't look at it and figure it out themselves. Holy Spirit has to do it. So that's what it is. So the only question that we have is when we read that whole thing in verse 18. The woman that thou sawest is that great city. Okay, I got it. Well, so the question becomes, who is that great city? Well, the description we get of that great city is which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Well, that tells us that it has to be a city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Well, what city would that be? Well, you could make an argument that it was Babylon, especially since we're talking about Babylon, the great whore, in chapter 17, in chapter 18, we're talking about Babylon again. And you will notice that out of the book of Revelation, we talked about the bowls, we talked about the vials, we talked about the plagues, we talked about the seals. We talk about Armageddon, we talk about the second coming, we talk about the rapture, we talk a little bit about millennium, we talk about heaven. But there is only one thing in Revelation. As a matter of fact, there's only one thing in the entire Bible that I can find that 2 chapters is dedicated to. And so I think that tells us, wow, God must really want us to understand this, and this has to be important, because chapter 17 and chapter 18 are both talking about Babylon. Babylon, and in chapter 18, Babylon is destroyed. We know for a fact that chapter 18, the Babylon in chapter 18 is destroyed, is not the Babylon of Nimrod. It's not the Babylon of Genesis. It's impossible with what we see. And oh, by the way, Babylon has never been 100% completely destroyed. Babylon has always had some population. Iran is even reviving it today, trying to find out and to get the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the seven wonders of the world. Babylon has never been completely destroyed. Babylon of chapter 18 will be completely destroyed. And we're talking about a Babylon in 18 and a Babylon in 17. Well, so can it be the Babylon of Genesis? Or does it make more sense to think that 17 and 18 are written to us in the spirit of Babylon as the great whore? Because the pseudo religion, because the false religion, because it all started back there with Satan, who pushed Nimrod, and Nimrod married Semiramis, who was his mother, and from that we got Tammuz, the sun god, and now we're worshiping today as the wafer god, so it appears that it gives us a description. Number one is the seven heads are seven mountains on which the woman sitteth. Okay, Babylon of Iran didn't sit on seven mountains. Babylon with Rome in mind definitely sit on seven mountains. So we see that chapter 17 is addressing the ecclesiastical, the spiritual, the religious, the part of Babylon.